In this video, I wanted to talk about the tax implications for Mexican-American dual citizens. We get this question a lot, especially from people who are considering getting their Mexican citizenship, either from descent or by naturalization. So there's a lot of Mexican Americans out there who are considering getting Mexican citizenship, so this video will speak to them. We also have a lot of expats living in Mexico, and they've been a resident for 2 to 5 years, and they're soon to be eligible for citizenship in Mexico. And they're wondering kind of what are going to be the implications of that from a tax perspective if they become citizen. Now, these two groups, things are a little bit different for. So in this video, we'll cover all things tax implications as a Mexican American dual citizen, where your tax situation really hinges on two core realities. The US taxes its citizens on worldwide income no matter where they live, while Mexico taxes based on residency. So you'll have worldwide income for residents or tax residents and only Mexican sourced income for non-residents. This setup, governed by the 1992 US-Mexico Income Tax Convention, with no major amendments really since then, means that you'll likely file returns in both countries if you're living in Mexico, or if you're only living in the US, you're only going to be filing a return in the US. It's quite rare to pay double taxes thanks to the credits, the exclusions, and the treaty tiebreakers. Dual status doesn't automatically trigger extra obligations beyond what single citizens face, but ignoring reporting like the FBAR or the FATCA can lead to penalties. And we've made other videos on our channel specifically about FBAR and FATCA if you're curious. So the key here is really determine your Mexican tax residency status first, and then layer in the US rules and treaty relief on top of it. But long story short, and we're going to get into a lot of detail here, but long story short, for most people, you don't have to worry about Mexican taxes. You only need to worry about US taxes, especially if you're not living in Mexico. If you're spending less than 6 months a year in Mexico, you're not considered a tax resident in Mexico. You will not even be filing returns in Mexico. You can have Mexican citizenship and literally not even file returns. If you're not spending time there, there's nothing that would consider you a tax resident. So from the perspective of should you get Mexican citizenship by descent, tax really is going to have no bearing or implication on that pretty much at all. Okay. So let's start with US taxes because they're unavoidable. Under IRC Section 61, you are taxed on all global income, wages, investments, rentals, etc., regardless of dual citizenship or location. For 2025, single filers need to file Form 1040 if gross income exceeds $14,600. If you're married filing jointly, it's $29,200. There's no escape via Mexican citizenship. The IRS views you solely as a U.S. person. But relief does exist in the form of the foreign earned income exclusion, which lets you exclude up to about $130K of foreign earned income. We've made other videos on the channel about the FEIE, the foreign earned income exclusion. It can be very powerful if you're living abroad. If you meet the physical presence test, meaning you're 330 days abroad in 12 months, or via the bona fide resident test, if you're a tax resident somewhere else. So you pair that with things like the foreign housing exclusion and the foreign tax credit, and there's a lot of different ways to reduce your taxes as an expat. You can also claim via Form 2555. So you can take a look at that form and kind of learn a little bit more there. So there's a lot to be said about being an American living abroad. For taxes paid to Mexico, you can use the foreign tax credit, the FTC, on Form 1116 to offset U.S. liability dollar for dollar, up to the U.S. rate on that income. For example, if you're making money in Mexico from maybe like a rental property, and Mexico withholds 10% tax on dividends or different taxes you pay, you can credit towards your U.S. tax bracket. Carry over excess credits or forward indefinitely. If you're self-employed, you can deduct foreign Social Security under totalization agreements, avoiding double FICA. For estates and gift taxes, U.S. thresholds apply, but Mexican assets can count towards it, which you can report via Form 706. So I know we're getting a little bit in the weeds here. We do have Mexican accountants. We also have U.S. expat accountants. So if you're a U.S. expat, you're living abroad, we know what to do with you. If you have income in Mexico, we know what to do with you. So probably is a good moment to take a quick break and mention that My Latin Life are a full-scale immigration, tax, and citizenship consultancy. We can help you get citizenship in Mexico. We can help you do anything that you need in Mexico in terms of accounting, in terms of doing your U.S. taxes and your Mexican taxes, and sort of looking at these things in a holistic way, or just getting your citizenship if or residency if you think that you're not going to need to file taxes in Mexico. So there's a link in the description where you can book a call with us. You can get expert one-on-one advice. You could be speaking to us as quickly as this week, and we can answer all your burning questions. And we can also provide the services that you need as well. But moving on, let's talk a bit about the Mexican side. So again, this only is if you become a tax resident. And the SAT in Mexico, the Servicio de Administración Tributaria, defines tax residency by one of three things. Number one, if you're spending 183 days plus in Mexico per year. Two, if your center of vital interests is in Mexico, meaning greater than 50% of your income is from Mexican sources, or if your primary home is in Mexico. And then number three, if you have a spouse or kids residing there. Okay? As a dual citizen living in the U.S., you're typically a non-resident unless you trigger these different rules. So this is probably uncommon even for snowbirds splitting your time. Unless you're spending the majority of the year in Mexico, you really have nothing to worry about. Non-residents can file Form 13 and 14 only on Mexican-sourced income, such as Mexican dividends if you have money in the bank over there, Mexican rentals if you have an Airbnb, Mexican capital gains if you have stocks. So there's no worldwide reporting needed if you're a non-tax resident, okay? And you don't even need to file annual returns if you're not a tax resident and you have no sort of income there. If you are a resident in Mexico, you are taxed on your worldwide income. And that's like, it's pretty standard tax rates, similar to Canada, the US, Europe. But there's actually a lot of ways where you can lower your taxes in Mexico using programs like the Resico you might have heard of. Resico is RESICO. We have another video on the channel all about the Resico program. And a lot of people actually find it very popular, especially the digital nomads, especially non-Americans that need to be a tax resident somewhere. They actually find that Mexico can be a pretty tax-friendly place to be a tax resident, and a good country for banking and financial infrastructure as well. Because banking in Mexico actually is really good. Like they have good neobanks with apps. They have good access to crypto. They have good traditional banks as well. It's relatively easy to open a bank account there, easy to invest. So the financial system in Mexico is better than a lot of people think. And then, of course, there are treaties. This stuff can get complicated, but there are treaties between the U.S. and Mexico. So there are treaties regarding salaries and job income. There's treaties around dividends and withholding tax there. There's treaties around interest and in relation to government bonds. There's treaties around pensions, which are only taxed in the resident country. So U.S. Social Security goes untaxed in Mexico if you're a U.S. resident. There's treaties around royalties as well. And really just a lot of different treaties, because the U.S. and Mexico, there's a lot going on there from an economic perspective. You have things like NAFTA, the North America Free Trade Agreement as well. Reporting can ramp up complexity. Probably the big one to be aware of is the F-bar. If you have aggregate foreign accounts over 10,000 US dollars at any times. And this includes money that you have in a Mexican bank. So what a lot of people do, F-bar is not a big deal in terms of reporting. You just got to remember to file it. But if you want to just avoid as much filing as possible, you want to keep less than 10K in your Mexican banks. There's also the FATCA as well, which is if you have specified foreign assets of greater than $50,000 as a single individual, or greater than $100,000 if married. We have another video on our channel going into a lot of detail about FATCA as well. So non-residents with Mexican assets can also file this thing called the DIOT or informativos, and residents report foreign assets over 25K via this thing called the CFDI. So, a little bit in the weeds, but long story short, there is some reporting as well. The more and more that you have assets and money and things going on in Mexico as a dual citizen. And then the US states can add a couple layers of complexity there. So if you're in Texas, it's a lot easier because there's, no state taxes on most things. If you're a resident of, say, California, things can get a little bit more complicated. If you want to change your state of tax residency to a more favorable one, such as moving from California to Texas or Florida, we can help with that as well here at MyLatinLife. So, you want to keep in mind the compliance costs. You'll have to file in the US, you'll have to file in Mexico potentially if you're doing stuff there. We have a team in Mexico. They're not very expensive for the annual accounting and tax returns, but it is a cost to be aware of. On the US side, if you start living a more expat life, then using a normal American accountant, they don't know a lot of this international stuff. So you're probably going to want to switch to a more expat focused accountant, something to keep in mind as well. Overall, the benefits definitely outweigh the hassles. It gets complicated, but the treaties really do a lot in terms of avoiding double taxation. Mexico is also just very forgiving overall in terms of, it's actually relatively difficult to become a Mexican tax resident, especially if you don't do anything to change your life. If you're continuing to live in the US or live outside of Mexico, then, most of this stuff isn't even going to apply. So this framework keeps you legal without overpaying. If your setup involves trusts or crypto, layer those in as well. Think about that. Inheritance tax is something to think about as well. So there really are a lot of considerations here, but most of it only applies when you start spending a lot of time in Mexico, investing in Mexico, owning houses and property and assets in Mexico. If you intend on simply continuing to live in the US but getting dual citizenship just because you're eligible, then most of this stuff isn't going to apply. So I think people are curious about my opinion if it's worth it. I think it's 100% worth it to get Mexican citizenship. It's really a no-brainer. It can be passed along on limited generations so that your kids and grandkids can benefit from it as well. Most expats, US expats, they tend to just keep making all their money in the US, even if they are spending time in Mexico. You can open bank accounts in Mexico as a dual citizen, but it's not even necessary. Even if you're spending, a lot of the time that I spend in Mexico, I don't even use Mexican bank accounts. I just keep using my US credit cards and using my US debit cards to get cash. So even if you spend time in Mexico, you don't really have to necessarily build a strong footprint in Mexico. But if you want to, or you need to, or that just happens to be your situation, well, the upside is there's a lot you can do to reduce your taxable income. So I hope you found this video helpful about the tax implications of US Mexican dual citizenship. Again, there's a link in the description where you can book a call with us and get all your burning questions answered specifically for you. We'd love to hear from you and speak to you. And if you need any of these services, whether it's a US expat accountant or a Mexican accountant, or you want help getting dual citizenship or residency in Mexico or whatever it is, we're here to help. Link in the description, book a call. And be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you found this helpful. You can drop a comment below. If you have any anecdotes that you'd like to share, we'd love to hear from you. And we'll see you in the next video.